Hey everyone, Tyler from Duelcaster here. Today I'm going to be breaking down Arcum Dagsson for Duel Commander, one of the most powerful and consistent combo commanders available. Arcum was the first Duel Commander deck I ever built over 5 years ago and has really only gotten more powerful over time. Be sure to stick around to the end as I'll go over some budget replacements and unintuitive combos. Let's get started. Okay, so the strategy or game plan for this deck is to abuse your commander, Arcum, as much as possible by tapping it repeatedly, multiple times a turn to the point where you can win. If you get to untap with him in just a single time, you should be able to win. So, really powerful combo deck. You might enjoy this deck if you like combo decks and you don't mind winning in a very similar fashion each time. And by the same token, you might dislike the deck if you like winning in a different kind of unique way each time. But I personally really enjoy winning, even though the lines are similar. I do enjoy fighting through resistance, like removal, counter spells, hate artifacts, and hate bears and stuff. It's still really fun for me to do that. And the history of this deck, I played this deck, like I said, for over 5 years, and in the past it was less consistent. It was very reactive. Because you couldn't usually win just by untapping with Arcum. You had to use him over the course of multiple turns, and that made it a lot more vulnerable. But now you with Paradox Engine, you can win in a single turn very easily. So let's get on to that, shall we? Let's start with the payoffs, and here we go. The big Kahuna, Paradox Engine. This is the card that lets you activate Arcum basically as much as you want in a turn. In order to win with the main line I'm going to discuss here first, you need 2 pieces of fodder, so artifact creatures, and any castable spell in your hand to trigger the Paradox Engine the initial time. And that spell can be your second piece of fodder too, if that's what you need to go off. So it's the first thing you want to search for with Arcum, and the second thing you want to search for after you cast that spell is Sentinel Flute. This is an old card, wasn't even in the deck before Paradox Engine, but it combines so perfectly with the engine that it's just perfect. You can basically tap it, pay any amount of mana, search for a creature from your deck with that mana cost. And this deck just so happens to be filled with 0-cost artifact creatures, which are perfect. They cost no mana to search for a Sentinel Flute, and they cost no mana to play, so you get to untap Paradox Engine for free, and they're fodder for Arcum. So you tap your flute, get an Ornithopter or whatever, and then you want to search for Basalt Monolith. This card is a mana rock, but it's a very unique one that it can untap itself for 3 mana. So you can tap it for 3, and then use Sentinel Flute, use Arcum, get another 0-drop, cast it, untap everything, and then get Rings of Bright Hearth. And this is an infinite mana combo with the Basalt Monolith, because you can, what you do is you pay the 3 mana to untap the Monolith, which you had floating from before. Then in response, that'll trigger Rings. You pay the 2, and then in response to that, you tap Basalt Monolith for mana. And what ends up happening is you input 5 mana, and you get output 6 mana, so you net 1 mana each cycle. And then that gives you infinite mana. Once you have infinite mana, you can use Sentinel Flute, tap it for 0, and search for Walking Ballista, and cast Walking Ballista for arbitrarily large amount of mana, immediately shoot all your opponent's creatures in their face, and win the game. So pretty consistent, pretty straightforward. Some other lines you can take are... this was probably the premium combo before Paradox Engine came out. It was Nevinyrral's Disc, Darksteel Forge, and Mycosynth Lattice. And the order you want to fetch these in, even this combo, you typically want to go Paradox Engine Flute and maybe even Basalt Monolith before you get these. But if you can't, there's other ways to do it. But you want to get the Forge first. Gives your artifacts indestructible, so it's a little bit more protection. Not that really matters, but hey, it's fine. Once you do that, you want to get the disc, because it enters the battlefield tapped, So you need to cast another spell to untap it to use it if you want to use it in the same turn. And it's another reason to get Paradox Engine first before you do all this stuff. You can tap it to destroy artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. And because Mycosynth Lattice makes every permanent an artifact, and all your artifacts are indestructible, only your opponent's permanents get blown up. You get to keep everything on your side of the board. They have nothing. So that usually prompts a concession. If you're playing online and your opponent's making you go through the motions with Basalt, Monolith, and Rings, you can just kind of interrupt that to go for the disc route if you want to save some time. But there's also a few other what I call value lines or stax lines. Possessed Portal is one of the most vicious stax cards ever printed. Costs 8, so it's not cheap, but obviously with Arcum you can get it out for free. And this basically doesn't let anyone draw a card for the rest of the game, and every end step, each player has to sack a permanent or discard a card. So if they don't have an answer in their hand, they're pretty much screwed. And one way you can break parity with Possessed Portal is Mirror Turbine, and this card is just a good card. I search this out sometimes if I only have one piece of fodder. If I'm worried about not being able to keep using Arcum, then I'll get Mirror Turbine, because that can keep making artifact creatures just for a tap. And then Clock of Omens lets you tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to untap an artifact, and there's some cool little intricate combos in this deck with it. It's quite good with Mirror Turbine because it kind of reduces the amount of artifacts you need to tap for each one, because you get a 1/1 mirror that you can then tap with Clock of Omens. And if you have Mycosynth Lattice along with Clock of Omens, then any 2 permanents you have on the battlefield can untap Arcum. So you can get multiple activations of Arcum that way. 1,000-Year Elixir, it used to be a target in its own right, but now it's more like you want to play it. If you draw it naturally, you can play it, and then Arcum will have haste, and that's really useful against resistance. And then Ensnaring Bridge is a famous card, really, really good at preventing you from dying immediately, and it doesn't really affect you at all because your game plan is to win with a giant walking ballista, so you have no need to attack pretty much ever with this deck. All right, then we go on to some value artifacts. These are not ones I typically search up pretty much ever, but I'm just going to discuss Elixir of Immortality. It's kind of the weakest card on the surface in this deck, but I like the having the option to search for it with Arcum. If, for example, one of your key combo pieces like Paradox Engine or Sit in the Flute was in your opening hand and was discarded by your opponent's duress, or they counterspelled it, something like that, then you can search up Elixir, shuffle it in, and then tap Arcum to retrieve it back out from your deck. And then we have some fodder here. I already mentioned these 4 0-cost artifact creatures. They're really important to the deck. Some versions don't run all 4, but I don't see any reason not to. I think they're really good. You just want the cheapest fodder possible, especially because you have a lot of counter spells you want to be able to hold mana up to. So there's no point in spending mana if they're just going to die anyway, in my opinion. Then we have a group of creatures. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 creatures that tap. They're 2-cost artifact creatures that tap for mana: Hedron Crawler, Silver Mirror, Plague Mirror, Mannequin, and Millikin. And so these let you play Arcum on turn 3 and are fodder for the following turn when you combo off. So that's really good. I would play as many, I don't know, these is printed pretty much. And then the only other cards I wanted to mention in this section are Mirror Retriever and Scrap Trawler. And what these 2 artifact creatures allow you to do is do an infinite loop. As long as you have some additional mana source like the Basalt Monolith primarily, and Paradox Engine, you can search up Mirror Retriever off of Sit in the Flute, cast it, untap everything, sack it, and then the next creature you get Scrap Trawler off Sit in the Flute. And then when Scrap Trawler dies, it can get Mirror Retriever back. When Mirror Retriever dies, it can get Scrap Trawler back. every time you replay those as casting a spell, you untap everything with Paradox Engine, and you can, as long as you have Basalt Monolith or some other mana sources, you can get as many activations of Arcum as you want in a single turn, which is really cool. And then, of course, Walking Ballista is the actual kill condition of choice, but in addition, it's just a really nice kind of creature in its own right. I mean, this card is played in some other decks just because it's a very, very flexible, unique card. And if you play it early and it dies, just get it back with Elixir of Immortality, Mirror Retriever, Scrap Trawler, or Academy Runes. All right, then we have some counter spells here. These are all pretty much oriented as combo protection. So you have cards like Swan Song, which I wouldn't put in a normal dual commander deck, but in a deck where I'm pretty much only trying to protect my combo, it's really great. The fact that it's 1 mana is super relevant, and them getting a bird is like whatever, it doesn't matter. Same thing with like Turn Aside or Delay, Pact of Negation. And then we have some card draw spells here. Some of the really kind of auto includes for blue: Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm. Some of them that are extra good in this deck, I think, are Gitaxian Probe, so you can see if the coast is clear to combo off, and Peak, because I really like that effect. I want to play Peak, even though normally I wouldn't put this in a blue deck. And then See Beyond has some nice utility in this deck because you can put back a artifact, non-creature artifact, that like a Possessed Portal. If you draw that in your opening hand, hey, just cast See Beyond and shuffle it right back in, and then you can get it back with Arcum, which is really useful. Finally, we have, as far as spells go, Cyclonic Rift, which just lets you bounce a problem permanent, because you only need to have Arcum kind of survive or have the ability to activate one time, and that should be enough to win. So I just have one of these. I might go up to 2 at some point, but the Cyclonic Rift seems like the best one to me, just for the ability to overload it if you need to, if you're desperate. So you can deal with like Linvala or Curse Totem or something like that. And then Tezzeret, just a great value card in this deck. A lot of times you're going to just -3 to get Snaring Bridge, or -0 to get some, like an Ornithopter or some pieces of fodder, or Mox Opal or something like that. It's pretty useful. Swiss Army knife type card. And as far as lands go, there's some lands that really pull their weight extra here, such as Minamo, School at Water's Edge. Gets you an extra usage out of Arcum, which is really nice. And then Hall of the Bandit Lord. This is kind of a risky card. It can, especially if you're playing against, Zergo or something with a lot of burn or really aggressive. But the ability to give Arcum haste is really valuable. This card wouldn't surprise them if they're tapped out. I guess they can see Hall coming, but it's still quite good. And then we have some lands that can turn into artifact creatures, like Mishra's Factory, Blink Moth Nexus, and Ink Moth Nexus. And then Foundry of the Councils can make 2 Thopters. So that's another way to activate Arcum if they wiped every other artifact creature off your board. One thing to keep in mind when you're playing this deck is that the way Arcum is worded, the artifact creature dying, the sacrifice is part of the resolution of the ability, not the cost. So they can actually interrupt Arcum by casting a Doomblade on whatever you're targeting with it, like your Silvermere or whatever. So that's something to keep in mind, and they would fizzle the ability. And yeah, well, that's pretty much the deck. Some budget replacements you could consider. It's funny because this deck's actually pretty relatively cheap to build. You're playing a bunch of jank like Memnite and Phyrexian Walker and a bunch of artifacts that no one else plays. So it's pretty cheap if you want an affordable option. Plus it's monocolor, so you don't want to have fetch lands, dual lands, all that stuff. You can't, there's a few cards, if you want to be really competitive, you can't get rid of, like the Paradox Engine. But one card you could replace if you absolutely had to. Snaring Bridge is a very expensive card. You could put in Boom Pile or Winter Orb. They're not quite the same, obviously, but they kind of interact with your opponent, kind of slow them down. They're kind of staxy type cards. Boom Pile is another way to combo, kind of like Nevinyrral's Disc with Darksteel Forge and Mycosynth Lattice. And then Metalworker is quite a good card, but you don't need it per se for this deck to really function. You could replace it with another artifact creature like Junk Diver or something like that. And then Force of Will, another great card to protect your combo, but if you needed to replace it, you could put in like Memory Lapse if you want another counter spell, or if you want some more card draw in that slot, you could put in Reverse Engineer. I actually had that in there for a while. It's good to have some sort of alternate game plan if Arcum gets countered or dies the first time. All right, well, that's it. Let me know in the comments what you think of the deck. Do you play Arcum yourself? What kind of wacky combos do you run in your version? Be curious to find out. And if you want to see videos of this deck in action, check out the playlist section. I have a 3-round league tournament featuring this deck that's already been published. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content.